Good morning, everyone, and you're all very welcome to this is the second QCN event of 2022. And this morning we're going to talk on the theme of harnessing customer feedback to improve service. And this is a theme that has very much come up through a great number of the sessions we held over the last year. We talked about trying to design our services around the customer. We talked about digitalization and making sure it's accessible to all. And our last event was very much on the theme of access. And in all of those, and particularly the last event, it really seemed to come up that the challenge faced by organizations in terms of actually hearing what customers want and need and translating that into operable reality. And it's a real challenge because particularly in larger organizations, there can be that gap between frontline service delivery and senior management to actually organize these things. And so making sure that we as organizations are actually listening sounds incredibly simple and actually is quite complex in practice. So this morning we're going to be hearing about approaches to that concept of listening. Just before that, just to welcome all of the QCN members that are here today. We actually have over 260, I think 270 at this stage have registered from almost 100 organizations across the wider public service. And it's really great, and we're delighted to have such support for this network and for all of the engagement we've had with you from across, and for people who are so generous in giving of their time and their expertise to come and talk to their colleagues and share, I think, the real excellence that there is in service delivery and the real commitment, and particularly that commitment to improvement. And again, that's what today is all about, that listening, learning and improving. And that's what we are all about as a network. And today, and it's great, at every event we have new members, which is wonderful. And today I'd like to welcome in particular some new members from TUSLA, from the International Protection Office, from Cork City and County Councils, and from Maynooth University. So just a few practical things before we get down to business. It's WebEx that we're using. By now I'm sure people are well familiar with the various video conferencing tools. You will be muted, so your microphone will be muted by default, and only the presenters' cameras will be enabled. But it is an interactive session nonetheless. And there will be an opportunity for all of you to put forward any questions or comments for our excellent panel of speakers today. To do so, you can use the chat function, which should be on the bottom of your screen. If it's not visible, you will just see 3 white dots on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and if you click on that, it'll present you, sorry, not the chat function, I beg your pardon, the Q&A function. So if you click on the little 3 white dots, if you can't see Q&A, that'll offer you up Q&A as an option, and you can put in any questions that you have there, and we'll get to them later on in the event. We have a really interesting lineup of speakers this morning. Firstly, we'll hear from Clare Kavanagh from Behaviour and Attitudes. And Behaviour and Attitudes have recently conducted a survey of civil service business customers. You are the first people to see the results of this survey. And Department of Public Expenditure and Reform will be publishing the survey, as the best civil servants say, in due course. But it's a sneak preview here this morning, and there's some really interesting, some really positive results, and also some issues of concern to us that I think it'll be really interesting to pick up and to talk about. After that then, and I suppose it's a really important thing about listening to customers, we listen to them when we're happy, we also listen to them when we're angry. And Jennifer Hanrahan will be speaking to us. She's a senior investigator in the Ombudsman's office, and that's where our customers go when they're unhappy, disappointed or angry. And rather than seeing that as a negative, I think it's really important that we see that as an opportunity for learning and improvement. And so Jennifer will be giving us her insights as a senior investigator into the nature of customer complaints and what we can do with them and how we can learn from them. And then we'll hear 2 really interesting examples of how organizations listen to their customers and build their service based on that listening. First of all, Jean Acheson from Revenue will talk to us about our Revenue's customer service surveys and how we develop our approach to customer management based on the results of those surveys. And then we'll hear from Dympna Murphy and Phelim from Cork City Council, taking us through their innovative approach to hearing from their customers and picking up on the customers' needs. So a really interesting morning ahead. Again, to remind you, you have the Q&A function there. Please put in your questions at any time. Don't wait until the end. It may be a while before we pick up on them. I'd also just say to our speakers, as we have 4 speakers, we're reasonably tight on time. So You all, I know, have your allotted time, so I'd ask you to try and stick as close as possible to that, if you don't mind. So, without further ado, we'll move on to hearing from our first speaker this morning, Clare from Behaviour and Attitudes on that.
Hi everyone, I'm delighted to be here today to present just a flavour of the recent of the results of the recent business customer survey that we undertook for you earlier for the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform earlier this year. So we were commissioned by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to conduct this survey of 500 business people, representative of businesses in Ireland, as I said earlier this year. We worked with the cross-departmental steering group in reviewing previous surveys, because this is the 5th iteration of this survey now undertaken over many years. In terms of co-developing the pilot questionnaire, which was tested prior to launch, and also reviewing the outputs. And as Brian has said there, all of that was really important in order to help us to design the best research instrument to do this work. The survey was undertaken using a telephone interviewing approach, which was exactly the same approach that's been used over previous iterations. So again, we've nice comparable data. All of the normal quality controls you would associate with research had been undertaken. So we undertook this research in our own Katie facility in Milltown here in Dublin. It's important also to remember that for this survey, we undertook a disproportionate sampling approach. And by that, I mean that what we did was we gave ourselves a robust sample size of micro, small and medium businesses from the business community, and they were weighted back then to be reflective of their actual proportion in the population. And the fieldwork was undertaken between the 10th of February to the 29th of March. So over the years of this research, one of the key questions that you've been asking is thinking about the civil service in overall terms. How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the service it provides? And it's really good news that this year, 71% of all business people claim they were either very or fairly satisfied with the service provided by the civil service. And you can see the 2018 result there in the grey in brackets, which was 73%. So, you know, it's within the margin of error. So almost 3/4 are satisfied. But the key positive finding from the results this year was that of the 71% who said they were very or fairly satisfied, 23% said they were very satisfied. And that was up by 18 percentage points compared to 2018. So, you know, we know from all the empirical evidence that once you hit that sweet spot of people giving you the top score they can give, that the magic happens in terms of customer satisfaction. So that really was a heartening score this year. We also wanted to look and ask people about their most recent interaction with either the civil service department or office that they were interacting with. So we asked 2 questions here, and we asked about the service received and we asked about the outcome of the contact. And 84% of all business people said they were satisfied with the service received, and 85% said they were very or fairly satisfied with the outcome of the contact. So, you know, 2 really strong metrics. And again, improving metrics versus last year when it was 78% for satisfaction with the service received and 82% satisfied with the outcome of the contact. But we all know that, you know, it's great to get high scores, but what's really important is how the interaction stacks up versus the customer's expectation. So again, you've been asking this question over many years. To what extent was the service received better, the same, or worse than expected? And 91% in 2022 said the service was equal or better than expected. And that's exactly the same result as it was in 2018. But what's really positive is that 18% said the service was better than expected. And that was 3 times the result that we got in 2018. So plus 12 percentage points. So you can see that over time, the civil service departments and offices are not just meeting expectations, but they're actually, for almost 1 in 5 this year, doing better than expectations. We know from all of our customer experience measurement work that a key decision point for any organization is what channel to invest in, because there's now so many channels. We tested all of the channels that the civil service offers, and at an overall level, satisfaction was highest for online digital interactive interactions. So 79% said they were satisfied with online digital interactions, compared to 77% for email, 70% for writing, 63% for phone, and 49% for in-person. Now, obviously, there was very few in-person interactions last year because of the pandemic, so people were less likely to rate in-person interactions, so the base size is smaller there. But if we think about the online, given that that was where the satisfaction was highest, one of the really positive things was when we looked at the individual elements of online in terms of ease of use, ease of finding the website, efficiency, and speed of response. We've really strong scores from 83% to 76% satisfaction, and they're all up versus 2018. You can just see on the chart there, the ease of using the digital interactive service had gone up 9 percentage points to 83% in this recent survey, and you can read on the chart there, there was an increase on all of the different elements there. Now, we're really just giving you a flavour this morning, but one of the things was there was a requirement to capture attitudes to the civil service across all of your ways of doing business. And I don't have time this morning to go through each of the individual statements that we asked business people to rate the civil service on. But there's a lot of green on the chart, so you can see there's very strong positive agreement that the civil service is doing a good job across almost all of the indicators that we measured. I will call out at the bottom of that chart, we asked people to agree or disagree that the civil service has good procedures for making complaints about the level of service received. And you'll see that the scores here are quite different, if you like, compared to all of the other elements assessed. Just 30% agreed that the civil service has good procedures for making complaints. And this obviously is a worry or a concern, but before we get too concerned, just to bear in mind that 1/4 of respondents neither agreed nor disagreed. That's not shown on the chart, but I think what that's really saying is that they hadn't had an opportunity or cause to use the complaints procedures, which is obviously good news, and for that reason they didn't comment on the procedures put in place. Areas for improvement, we don't have time to go through all of the evidence, but I can tell you that there was 4 key areas suggested by the survey. The first one was about speed of turnaround. Where a minority were dissatisfied, there was often a perception that the process was too slow, and that came up for 2 in 5 of respondents. You won't be surprised, I think, given that, you know, we saw in this survey that there's a high satisfaction with online, but also there's a lot of use of remote channels, that increasing numbers were talking about it. They were dissatisfied with the ease of finding correct email addresses and correct telephone numbers. Now, the numbers are small, so 16% dissatisfied with the ease of finding correct email addresses and 25% dissatisfied with the ease of finding telephone numbers, but it's something to watch given increasing use of those technologies. We've talked about complaints. Just 30% agreed that the civil service has good procedures for making complaints. To me, that's probably a communication issue, given that particularly a quarter didn't feel that they were well enough versed to give an answer. And also, 33% of those who interacted with a government office in the past 12 months by phone were dissatisfied with the telephone menu or automated service. And actually, that has increased over time. If we look at the results back to 2016, that was 27% there. So it's starting to increase over time. But I think, as a flavour, we're really showing in this survey a strong, positive and improved response for the civil servants evidence really in this most recent survey of business people. And I think given the pandemic and the atypical demands, placed on the civil service since 2018, to me, this is a very positive result. And I'd just like to say congratulations to you all.
Thanks very much, Claire. And thanks for it's some fascinating insights. I have to say, personally, I feel endorsed by that feeling that I'm not the only person who hates automated telephone menus. But I think I've yet to meet anybody who does. But nonetheless, as we all move into increasingly sort of digitalized interaction, it's just one of those challenges is not to run away from it, but to develop the telephone menu that actually works for people and doesn't make them feel angry before they've even got through. So I just thought that was, I suppose, just more of a personal observation overall, as I say. And thanks for your congratulations. I mean, these are very, very positive results, and given especially the fact that they also reflect very, very challenging times. I somehow wonder, it'll be really interesting to see when we return to this in another year or two, whether we've done better in wartime almost than we will in peacetime again, because I think there's no doubt that across the public service, an awful lot of people rose magnificently to the challenge of COVID. So that's just, actually one of the things that really jumped out for me as well was that satisfaction with digital. Because again, given how much we're all redesigning and reinvesting in digital, and we've had a few sessions of this network where we've worried, particularly about the possibility of exclusion. Now it's probably more in the personal customer space than the business customer space, I think. But it's nonetheless quite reassuring to see those levels of satisfaction. And I think, again, there'll be value in looking at our business or our personal customers in similar way, just to see if that experience is also reflected. I don't know, Claire, just from your own perspective, that question of the extent to which this reflects particularly the COVID response, or whether this reflects, obviously you have the previous year's numbers, so they're probably still pretty good. So it's not necessarily an aberration, is it, do you think?
No, I don't think it's an aberration. I do think we've seen in over the pandemic that there was, I suppose, a sympathy for public services that people had to kind of muddle through. And we would have seen a COVID bounce, even amongst the other public service research that we've done, but also even in private circumstances, where private enterprises were rated by people, that there was a sort of a willingness maybe to give a little bit higher scores than normal, because we were in wartime. But at the same time, given that, we're now seeing that kind of COVID bounce rescind, if you like, and that's starting to not be so much in evidence. So I think that is something to bear in mind for the results this year. I think I'd also bear in mind that we are speaking to a B2B audience, who, when we looked through the results in detail, the larger companies tended to maybe be more satisfied with online and remote pieces, probably because they've more technology and they've more expertise in that, so that they were happier with that. You know, I think if we were talking about you know, a domestic audience here, we might have some different results.
Okay, thanks, Gary. That's really interesting. And again, it's something I think we'll look to down the road with this network, because that would be certainly a concern. I think that digital works really well, and interesting that you should refer to larger businesses as well, who are obviously, it's the way they do business too, so they're comfortable.
Yeah.
But thanks, Claire. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you when we come to the Q&A session. Really appreciate that. In case we all get too comfortable, and the risk with Claire's presentation is that we could sort of wallow in self-congratulation, although there are a few warning flags in there I think we need to pay attention to. But we're going to turn to Jennifer Hanrahan now to bring us back down to earth. Jennifer, as I said, is where our customers go when they're not happy. She's a senior investigator in the Ombudsman's office and has spoken to the QCSN on previous occasions. But Jennifer is going to talk to us about that very issue that Claire highlighted, which is about complaints procedures and their impact on customer satisfaction. So, Jennifer, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me properly and see all my slides. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about developing an effective complaint handling procedure. And I apologise, because I'm sure complaints aren't top of your list on a Tuesday morning after a bank holiday weekend. But anyway, we'll go through it anyway. Just make sure my slides are working. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about our office, just to let you know. I won't take too much time on it, let you know what we do and about us. I have spoken to the network before, but just to be a lot of new members, I'm sure. And I just want to talk to you about kind of, you know, the ideal, I suppose, complaint handling procedures. And I'll mention the Ombudsman's casebook at the end. You'll see the relevance as I go through the slides. Okay, so the Ombudsman's office, I suppose, has been in operation for about 38 years. It opened its doors in 1984. And over that time, the office has, I suppose, built up extensive experience in dealing with complaints about public service providers, is what we would call them, their bodies under remit, and about the different schemes that are administered by the bodies and different actions of the bodies. The main role, of course, of the Ombudsman is to resolve complaints from members of the public, individual complaints, but we often have to, you know, initiate systemic investigations if we see we're getting a number of complaints about something. But really the main role of the Ombudsman is to influence improvements in public service. Now, Ger Deering is the Ombudsman, and he only took up that role this year in February, but Ger had previously been by the Financial Services Ombudsman. In the office, when we're investigating complaints, the office is independent and we are impartial. We're not an advocate and we're not a mediator, and we're not for either side. We're absolutely independent. We take an inquisitorial approach rather than a kind of an adversarial approach. And we like to base our findings, our evidence-based. Overall, really, I suppose the process in the Ombudsman's office is informal, and we really are focused on reaching a resolution of a complaint and trying to improve services. And for us, really, that is the main aspect of our work. Now, we can accept complaints, which you probably know, from about a wide range of public bodies, government departments, local authorities, health and social care, nursing homes, education, regulatory bodies, direct provisions, and other sectors. Now, I'm just going to talk quickly about last year. So in 2021, we were actually very, very busy, and we received over 4,000 complaints, which was actually the highest number of complaints we'd ever received in our office in the history of the office. Now, I suppose, luckily or fortunate enough for us, we also managed to close more complaints than we'd ever closed before, which was really good because it meant we didn't end up with a big backlog. But I suppose the important thing about that for you is that when complainants come to our office, they've already been to your office first of all. So what we're seeing is how you handle the complaint in the first instance. Now, it doesn't mean that every complaint that comes to us is upheld, but if a complaint is well handled, we'll see that, and that's a very important thing to see when it comes to our office. And obviously, if a complaint is well handled, well, hopefully it won't come to our office. And I suppose that's part of the point of a good complaints management system, is if a complainant feels that they're heard by you and that what they've complained about may result in some improvement, they're less likely to be dissatisfied with the outcome of how their complaint was handled. So I suppose, why are complaints important? Well, it probably seems, I don't know if it seems obvious, but complaints can improve services. I know we probably don't want to get complaints, and when we get them, they probably seem like an annoyance, but actually they are a very positive thing. And Breen mentioned that earlier on. That's one of the things, is to view a complaint as something that's, okay, you don't want to be complained about, but it is actually a positive. So I suppose when you look at it, I think complaints are really important. They're like an important part of business intelligence, I suppose. They're very, they provide us with the service user's perspective. And you have to admit, the service user has a very distinct kind of advantage, and that they can see your service from a different perspective to us. They can see it from the outside. They see a service from different interaction points, and they can view how a service is looking after its customers. And for us to listen to their voice is a very important thing, and it provides a business with a very important source, I suppose, of data. Also, complaints are an indicator maybe that there is problems looming, and I think it would be very, very important for us to listen to these complaints, obviously, if we want to learn from them as well. I suppose if a complaint is listened to, if it's well handled and it's learned from, it'll improve people's view of a service. Also, I have to say, in the Ombudsman's office, in 2015, the Ombudsman carried out an investigation into how complaints were handled in the health service, the Learning to Get Better investigation. And one of the findings was that people didn't know how to make a complaint. They didn't know where to go to make a complaint. And the other part was that they felt it wouldn't make any difference. So really, it shows how important it is to have a really good and solid and robust complaints management system. So I suppose a good complaints management system has actual benefits for both the service user, but also for the service provider, obviously from the learning perspective from the service. It helps the service resolve issues in a timely and, I suppose, cost-effective manner. And it also then gets valuable learning for the service. It then strengthens people's confidence in a service. Now, I suppose when you're looking at a complaints management system, the very first thing is you have to make it easy for people to complain. So you need to make sure that your complaint system is accessible. You need to make it easy, and it should be, complaints should be accepted in all formats. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis at the moment on digital first, and we're the same in our office, but really we shouldn't leave any man behind. And I suppose it's important that we can accept complaints, from people, either online, but also in written formats over the phone, and to be able to assist people who probably can't articulate their complaints as easily as other people. The other thing I would say is that there should be information on how to complain in very, very obvious places. So in public areas, people should know how to complain even when they don't want to make a complaint. So it should be in public places, maybe how to make a complaint, which way to go about it. Staff should know how to direct people to make a complaint. And the other part maybe is on a website. It should be probably placed on the home page. I recently was looking at a website of a company. I have to say I was very impressed. It was there right front and centre how to make a complaint, because you need to know people's feedback on your service. The other part is that there should be a two-stage process. There should be a kind of a stage one that would be more for frontline process, so that at the first point of contact where people make a complaint, and that staff are empowered to deal with that complaint if they can, at the first contact. However, staff should also know when a complaint needs to be moved into a stage two if they know that it's a more serious issue. So there should be a stage two then available to people who either aren't happy with how their complaint was dealt with in the first place, or else where the issue is more complex and should be moved to a stage two. I suppose if it's a more serious issue, a public service provider should consider even getting an independent view if it was something very, very serious. Now, I think when you come into actually handling the complaint, obviously when you're right, there should be timelines that should be adhered to as well. And any response to a complaint should, contain a good explanation. If something has gone wrong, there should be redress, and then obviously any learning should be fed back into the system. Now, how you investigate each complaint will obviously be very dependent on the nature of the complaint in the first place and the complexity and sensitivity of the issue. Now, the other part is it's pointless having a good complaint system if there isn't top level commitment. I believe strongly that top level commitment is very, very important. First of all, there should be a single complaint system across an organisation and a single place to record complaints so that any kind of if there's any recurrence of complaints that it can be seen quite easily. Obviously, the complaint system to be effective, it needs to be fed back to the top levels in the organisation, and really there should be a record of complaints reported back maybe to a senior management team on a regular basis. You remember, a complaint that's not well handled effectively in the first instance can often grow legs and can actually increase the workload and increase costs for the organisation as well. Definitely a single point of contact if someone is looking after a complaint, and people need to know where to go. I think staff training is really, really important. I think probably staff should be trained on how to deal with complaints. They should be empowered to deal with complaints in the front line. It should be part of induction training and perhaps refresher training as people are, later on and further on down the line. In the office here, actually, in about just prior to the pandemic, we worked with the HSE and we developed some e-learning complaint handling modules. We actually developed 2 sets with the HSE. One was for frontline staff to know what a complaint is, how to deal with the complaint, and just for a good approach to complaints. And the second one was actually for complaint handlers. And I think complaint handlers need to have proper training in dealing with complaints. The other part is actually the one for the frontline workers. That actually was included in their induction training, and now it's included in all induction training across the organisation. I think that's really important. And also, I mean, as you can say, there's actual benefits for an organisation in dealing with complaints correctly in the first instance. It's getting it right first time where possible. It actually avoids a lot of hurt that can happen if a complaint becomes more serious and people get more entrenched in their views, I suppose. We're dealing with the complaint in the office at the moment, and unfortunately it was a fairly normal happening, the actual complaint itself, but it was dealt with poorly by the service provider in the first instance. And to be honest, looking at it now, if you could just reel it back to the very first time that the complaint landed on the desk, it would be a very different complaint today, and there wouldn't be so much collateral damage, I think, for the staff involved, and a lot of hurt has happened over the complaint, and it's just as a lesson, I think, for all of us to learn. Now, in our office as well, we work with public service providers, and we have actually an area on our website where we have guides for public service providers about developing a complaint handling system, and that's there actually. And we also have another one that's very interesting, the 6 rules for getting it right, which is the Ombudsman's Guide to Good Administration. Then we have a guide for provision of redress. So I suppose redress is like, sometimes our main thing would be that you put people back in where they were. If something has gone wrong, you try to put them back to the position they were before it happened. But if you can't, well, then sometimes what you have to do is, an apology goes a long way in helping to remove some of the hurt. An explanation, a clear explanation, is always really necessary in the first instance when you're making a decision, and also then if someone is making a complaint after, correcting the error where possible, and if not, and depending on the nature of the complaint, there may be some financial redress. And we also have a guide for making a meaningful apology, and you'd be amazed how often people say to us when they come to us in our office, we just want an apology, we just want an explanation, and we don't want it to happen to anyone else. And that's always the main thing that comes through to us. So look, when things go wrong, I think it's important that a service is open and honest, that we put things right where possible, that we learn from mistake. And I think in the Ombudsman's office, that's the main point. And then that we introduce procedures and practices to prevent a recurrence. The other part is that there's shared learning, because it's really important that if something goes wrong here, that others within the organisation know about. And that's part of the top level commitment, I think, and it's feeding back into the organisation. One of the other things, and I hope I'm not going too long, one of the other things that we would say is we've seen sometimes on websites where they say you said and we did, and that's a very important thing as well. So people can see the value of their complaint, so they can see, we got complaints about this and we did this, and that's actually very effective. So I think as organisations, and in the Ombudsman's office as well, we all need to learn to listen. I think that's really important. And then we need to listen to learn. So it's kind of a feedback loop, and it's it's very important. So in the Ombudsman's office as well, then we have a casebook, and that just gives you a summary of some of the cases that we've examined over the last period. And we actually, as you say, there's it's an email address if you want to go onto our mailing list, because the idea is that we show to you the outcome from our complaints. And then maybe that is applicable to your area. And then you'll say, okay, well, we'll put safeguards in place that won't happen here. And that's kind of the idea of the casebook. So it contains case summaries. It's widely circulated. There's different sectors within each casebook, but also we can do a sector specific one sometimes as well. And I just think it gives valuable information about things that have gone wrong and how bodies have dealt with them. And then, so I don't know whether any of your organisations would think of developing a casebook. I know the Health Service has, and the Health Service has their own casebook now, which they send out across the organisation so others can learn, and it helps them identify trends and highlights learnings and good outcomes. And I think it's a very good training sort of and reference material. And I think the Health Service has found it very useful as well. And I think that's all from me.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and thanks. That's been really interesting, and I think what's really welcome for all of us is that kind of human dimension to the Ombudsman's office, because I think the gut reaction to a letter from your office is probably similar to one from the CNAG's office, and you both provide extremely valuable service, but the initial reaction is, oh dear, I'm in trouble here. So that.
Oh, no, the thing is, we like to work with organisations. You know, when we send a letter, and that's part of the complaints process, isn't it? It's the back and forth and making sure we have proper information to give to the complainant, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, and I think it's that light that you present it in, that this is all about listening, learning, and doing better, as opposed to taking scalps for bad behavior. Yeah. is hugely valuable. One thing that just struck me, and I don't know if you have the information. I mean, when you talk about a record year and it's 4,004 complaints, in the sort of millions of transactions that happen across the entire public service, that seems instinctively to be quite a small number. Yeah. And I don't know, do you have a sense internationally whether we're
in the right place? Yeah, I think we are in the right place. I mean, I think the public sector does very well, but there is obviously occasions where, you know, obviously complaints have to come to us. I mean, I think out of all the complaints that come to us, about 48% get a positive outcome. It's not always that complaints are upheld. Some are upheld, some are partially upheld, but often it's what we call assistance provided, where we just give you know, a more detailed explanation, or we can do something else for the person, you know, who's come to our office, so they've kind of gained. But I think either way, anyone who will come to the office will gain, because eventually you'll have a risk that there is always these intractable complaints that you just can't deal with, and there's people who'll always come to our office. So at least there is a final port of call, which is always, I think, a benefit for both the service provider and for the complainant. But yeah, as you say, I mean, they're not big numbers. I don't think they're big numbers. And even when you look at the numbers within the sectors, they're not large when you consider the interactions. This year, probably the higher ones, which is a little bit unusual this year, were local authority complaints went up this year. I would say that's to do with its housing. You know, a lot of it was to do with housing issues, you know, allocations and repairs, and that could have been because COVID, maybe, you know, people couldn't get out to do repairs on houses. There's a lot of, you know, different reasons for those things.
Yes, so sometimes it's just understanding why a service couldn't be delivered rather than.
Yeah.
But that's really useful. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Again, just to remind everybody, the question and answer function is available to you under Q&A, and we'll come back to all of our panelists later on for a chat. Obviously, complaints is one mechanism. Ideally, and in some ways listening to Jennifer, I was thinking that probably success ultimately for the Ombudsman's office is almost putting yourself out of business. Probably never happen, but as I say, it's one route. The other route, obviously, is for organizations to do something positive and actually go out and ask customers what they think, what's on their mind, what their attitudes are. So our next speaker, Jean Acheson, is going to talk about how Revenue have done that through our customer service surveys, through Revenues. I shouldn't personalize it. I am from Revenue, but through our customer service surveys, and more importantly, not just doing the survey, but what sort of actions the organisation takes on foot at that. So, Jean, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Oh, I am unmuted. Thanks very much. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Breen. My name's Jean Acheson. I work in the Strategy Evaluation and Reporting branch in Revenue. One of the goals of this branch is to provide evidence and analysis to inform revenue strategy. I'll spend a few minutes this morning discussing how we used customer feedback from customer surveys to inform actions to improve our service for compliance. No, sorry about this. Okay, so just by way of introduction, Revenue has quite a long-standing programme of annual customer surveys, the purpose of which is to assess customer satisfaction and utilise customer views to improve the service offered by Revenue. We employ key principles of survey design when running these surveys. We obtain specific questions to ask from the operational or customer-facing parts of Revenue. We ensure the questions are focused, brief, simple, and using random sampling, we ensure the respondents are representative of the wider customer population. And we typically return to the same customer groupings periodically to establish trends, to see if views have changed over time. In late 2018, we surveyed chargeable persons for the first time. A chargeable person is tax talk for someone subject to self-assessed income tax. So an example would be a self-employed person. We focused on those with low self-assessed income, less than €10,000 per year. We obtained quite a high survey response rate, 31%, and that ensured the results were robust and that we could generalise from these survey responses back to the overall population of low-income chargeable persons. In terms of insights from the survey, well, the first result we found was reassuring. Customer satisfaction levels were high. The darkest green bar on the chart there shows the results for chargeable persons, and we found that 79% of respondents were either very satisfied or satisfied with the customer service received from Revenue. And these results were broadly in line with the findings from our other surveys of other customer groups, such as PAYE customers or SMEs, who are represented by the other coloured bars on the chart. However, a second result we found was less reassuring, and this related to the reasons our customers filed tax returns. So for a self-assessed person, the tax return in question is called a Form 11. It's filed once a year by the 31st of October. We identified from our survey that 13% of low-income chargeable persons did not, in fact, have a requirement to file this tax return. So this is quite worrying. Like, this is 1 in 8 people who filed a return from this low-income cohort who didn't necessarily need to do so. Now, we always leave some free text, some open text comment boxes in our surveys. Over the years, we've found they add quite a bit of depth to the statistics we collect, and they add a bit of colour to our final published reports as well. So through the textual analysis for this particular survey, we identified 2 leading reasons for why people might file this tax return without actually being required to. And the first reason was legacy. So people filled it out once in the past, and they thought they had to continue to do so in the future. They continued to receive notice from Revenue alerting them about the availability of the form. The second reason was convenience. For example, someone might have started using this tax return a number of years ago to claim health expenses, and they just kept going because by that stage, the form was familiar to them. Given the relatively low incomes of those surveyed, we also asked a question about the option to file a Form 12 tax return instead. The Form 12 is a simplified income tax return, and it can be filled out by those whose main source of income is PAYE employment, but they have a little, self-assessed income on the side as well. And it's possible to claim your credits and your health expense relief on this more simplified form as well. However, we established that 3/4 of these customers were actually unaware of their potential entitlement to file the Form 12. Following the completion of the survey and kind of in light of the insights it had thrown up for us, we conducted more research on the full population. So that's the total number of low-income chargeable persons, 176,000 on our records. And this review, first, it confirmed the low-risk nature of the taxpayer segment. Very few were subject to revenue interventions, such as audits, etc. However, a considerable number, 43%, did make contact with Revenue. And these queries may not all have related to income tax, but they do highlight the administrative burden placed both on the customer and on Revenue. So following the results of the survey and this population profile, both of which we published on the Revenue website, Revenue went on to make a public commitment to these taxpayers in its last statement of strategy, which was produced in late 2019. Now, one of Revenue's core strategic pillars is service for compliance. This means we support taxpayers to achieve high voluntary levels of compliance. And having identified that these customers were fairly low risk, as well as identifying the unnecessary filing of tax returns by some of them, we committed to reducing the compliance burden for them. So specifically in 2020, we wrote out to over 4,000 customers, advised them that we had ceased their income tax registration, as our population research had indicated these particular customers were inactive for self-assessed income tax purposes. We also identified other customers whose tax filings suggested that they did not need to file the long Form 11, and we contacted 700 of these to issue income tax cancellation forms and advise them that they could use the shorter, quicker Form 12 instead. Following these targeted steps to deal with legacy issues, we also took more general steps to raise awareness around compliance by altering the tax return itself. So for the first time, the 2021 Form 11 highlighted the applicable income limits that make someone chargeable. This section of the tax return also referenced the Form 12 as a possible alternative choice for those wishing to claim tax relief for health expenses. And finally, we continue to expand the evidence base or keep it live on this particular customer group. So for the first time in the 2021 form, we asked the self-assessed filers their reasons for filling out this particular tax return. So in summary, by reaching out to our customers in a very systematic way, by analysing their feedback in great detail, we were able to reduce the compliance burden for this group of low-income self-assessed taxpayers. Revenue's mission is to serve the community by fairly and efficiently collecting taxes and duties, and its mission was realised here. We achieved an efficient outcome by reducing the cost both to our customers and to Revenue in terms of money, time, resources, and we achieved a fairer outcome because these particular taxpayers operate on the margins of the self-assessment system, and they deserve a proportionate administrative burden as a result, which causes as little worry and as little trouble for them as possible. So I'll leave it there, Brian. Thank you all.
That's great, Jean. Thanks very much. And it's a wonderfully clear example of, I think, a really practical application of spontaneous reaction from customer feedback rather than necessarily either complaint or even identified concern. I think just maybe for colleagues in the room, as it were, one thing, because as public servants, most of us don't fill out a Form 11. What you may not appreciate is just what a beast of a thing it is. It's about 40 pages long, and it takes you through all sorts of questions about share income and dividend income and rental income and every known form of money making that is possible. Now, you can hop and skip through it online, but it is, compared to the 12, it is a huge compliance burden. And it's actually interesting that so many people were subjecting themselves to this on an annual basis, without complaining about it. But also great, I think, that we took that positive step. Jean, and I'm kind of wondering, I mean, I know obviously we're still collecting the data on the 2021 stuff, well, it won't be coming in until later, but do we have any sense of customer feedback to the actions that we took, going out to people and saying, sorry, you probably shouldn't be in this category?
I think we might need to wait and see until this year's returns are in, but no, I'm not aware of any negative feedback anyway that arose as a result of the letter campaigns that took place to let people know about alternatives, or to let them know that we had taken them, out of this particular tax form category.
Yeah, thanks. No, and it's one thing that I have heard, there was a little bit of concern actually among the tax practitioner community, because clearly with that form being such a beast of a thing, some people just went to an advisor even when they had very little income to report. So reducing the compliance burden isn't just about reducing paper, it's also about reducing the actual cost to our taxpayers. So I think it's a really excellent example of just that positive service design, listening without having to wait for the complaints. So that's great. Listen, thanks again, Jean. Well done on that. And again, we may come back to that under the Q&A, just to remind people again, the Q&A box is open there. I think there are a few bits and pieces coming in. Interesting question, actually, on survey fatigue, which might come back to you on, Jean, later on in the conversation as an expert on surveys generally. So moving on then again in the area of listening organisations to Cork City Council, and now we're going to hear from Dympna Murphy and Phelim Collins. And they're going to share a feedback project that they developed, which took a really, really innovative approach to ensuring that they could gather insights from the council's customer base and use that to create an impact on how the council delivered their services. So I don't know, is it Dympna, are you leading off?
Yeah, I lead off. I'm just waiting for it to load up there now.
Great, I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just we haven't used there we go. Everybody can see that? Yeah, you can see it?
Yep, that's perfect.
Perfect, great stuff. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm just having trouble there moving on the slide.
Yeah, I might be able to do it on my end if that's good. Yeah, I can do it here if you want, no problem.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just moving on.
No problem, Dympna, let me know.
Thank you. Yeah, might move it on there. So just to, I suppose everybody, yeah, you can move on to the next slide there, please. That's fine.
Yep, can you see the Cork is slide then, Dympna?
No, I can't see it, so maybe I need to come out of this, do I?
That's fine. No, it's fine. I'll put it up on my screen. Bear with, folks. Okay. No problem. One moment.
Yeah, just the one before that.
Yeah, 1 second. And I will share your presentation now. 1 second.
Sorry, no, but
no problem.
Worked in practice this morning.
That's fine. And Dympna. Yeah, it's just uploading now, folks. 1 moment. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, you can move on to the next one straight away.
There you go.
Just the one before that, if you don't mind.
Before? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So I suppose you've probably seen this before, but just to put us in context, this is how we all feel down here. We have notions about ourselves. We think we're very important. And I suppose in the context of the presentation this morning, people are very vocal in Cork and they know their rights. And they will they will make their complaints made known to us. So you can move on there, please, if you don't mind. Yeah. So Cork, I suppose, is on the move. We are the second biggest city, and I suppose the third biggest on the island, if you like, but great plans. We're not competing with Dublin, but we are competing to stay that second city, I suppose, in the Republic, if you like. There was a boundary extension to the city in 2019, so the population went from 125 to 210. There's an area of 187 kilometres. You can see there's huge FDI employers here in Cork City. We have an airport, we have a very deep harbour, so tourists are very important to us, and you can see that we were kind of nominated as the friendliest city in Europe. We are on both on the Wild Atlantic Way and Ireland's Ancient East. We have 2 universities, including a Marine Institute, School of Music, School of Art, sport. They're absolutely obsessed with sport down here, as you probably know, in particular the hurling. We have good road infrastructure. We have a link road. We have a tunnel under the Lee going east. Big pharma here in the city and just outside the city. So as I say, you know, we do have notions, and we do have notions that we will be growing in the next while. So you move on to the next slide there. Yeah, so again, Cork City, lots and lots of, you know, reimagining what's going to go on down here. Just measures designed to support the to enhance the pedestrianisation in the city centre. 17 streets going to be pedestrianised, new bike parking, extended street furniture, great atmosphere down here in the summer, a big city branding initiative, and murals. We have an Ardu project where there's murals like the one you see here with the hurler all over the city. But the next slide there, the next slide will show there's a traditional Cork, like there is in any county, in any local authority. And really, this is the bread and butter of Cork City Council's the customer service unit. We have over 10,000 social housing in Cork. That brings with it a huge housing maintenance, and the Office of the Ombudsman will know all about this. Huge housing maintenance demand on those 10,000 houses. We have to deal with lots of queries about HAP and RAS, potholes, a favourite of everybody out there, huge questions about the civic amenity on a daily basis, planning queries, illegal dumping and parking issues. And I think these really are the big ones. So the genesis of the customer service unit, maybe Phelim, I'll hand over to you. So it's the next slide there.
So as Dympna pointed out, to coincide with the boundary extension in 2019, a customer service unit was set up. Now, on any given day, we would have 7 agents on duty, and the average amount of contacts we would deal with would be 653. So that was an average of 93 responses per agent. Now, when one considers that the industrial average is 35 to 55 responses, we felt that we had to look at it and see how we could reduce the amount of calls coming into the customer service unit. So next slide there, please. So the objective of the survey was to evaluate why callers in the first place were contacting the CSU, identify if possible if the issue could have been solved elsewhere, thus avoiding a contact, and then to see where the callers were getting their information from in relation to our contact details, etc., etc. So we undertook to carry out a survey. The survey then was delivered to the customer service agents. They're asking the callers questions, and in turn then they enter those responses onto an online form. The survey was developed and hosted internally by the City Council. So how did we get buy-in in terms of the agent? We made them part of the process, and we put out the idea, an accurate idea that this is going to help if we can identify issues. This will help to reduce the amount of calls coming into yourselves, thus reducing their workload. In terms of the public, we explained the benefits about improvement of responses and service delivery. Senior management in turn then recognised that there was a serious number of calls and the various nature of the calls, and they accepted that we needed to review the calls on an ongoing basis, and from that derive how best to communicate with our clients. So if you move on to the next slide there, please. So as I said, the survey was conducted during February and March 2021. 1,022 people participated. 61% of them were women, 37% of them were men. And the majority of the callers were between the 35 to 55 age bracket. So that raised questions for us then in terms of how we best communicate with that genre. So if you move on to the next slide, please. Calls coming into the CSU, as you can see clearly from the slide, 87% of the calls came directly to the CSU. That was a total of 889 calls out of the 1,022. 11% of them were as a result of people not getting an answer or being able to leave a voicemail for somebody to call them back. So out of that, one of the recommendations that came out of that was that we would formulate a phone email policy, and that was to be incorporated into everybody's working day. So the phone policy was developed and it was circulated to all of the staff, and there was a considerable buy-in into that phone policy. Next slide, please. We then tried to establish where the caller got their CSU details from. So 57% of them got our contact details via Google, and 40% of them via the website. The remainder then got it through other sources, for example, council letters, emails, flyers, newsletters, etc., etc. So next slide, please. So this is a snapshot now of the type of calls that we received during the course of the survey. 685 of them were in relation to housing, and I'll go through the breakdown of those figures now in the next slide. Our next busiest area then following housing was roads and environment. So the next slide, please. Now this is a breakdown of the housing related calls that we received during the period of the survey. Now, as was mentioned earlier, the vast majority of them there were housing maintenance, 228, followed by allocations, 198. So therefore 22% of all the housing related calls we received were in relation to housing maintenance, and 19% were in relation to allocation. So that was 41% of the total housing related calls that we received. Next slide, please. So we have a system there whereby we can monitor the amount of repeat calls that we receive, but only in relation to housing maintenance. So over a period of 19 months, we received 32,434 repeat calls in relation to housing maintenance. So that's approximately 80 calls a day, which is quite a high number. Overall, it's a total of 1,081 hours, which equates to 148 working days. That's 7.8 days per month answering repeat calls. So that was an area that caused us no small amount of concern. So the next slide then is a breakdown of the roads cases that we received, and not surprisingly, most of it was to do with road maintenance, including potholes, parking being the next highest, followed by public lighting. Next slide, please. So we have here then a breakdown of the environment related cases we received. Not surprisingly, again, 42% of the environment related cases we received were to do with street cleaning and litter. The other cases then on the next slide, the categories here are fairly small, but finance, surprisingly, was the highest, but that was in relation at the time to the a lot of NPPR queries and in relation to fines and COVID assistant schemes. So if we move on to the next slide now, please. We asked the callers if they had tried to find their query on the council website. So 876 of them responded that they had not. And of those who did, 135, they said they had to call the CSU because they either couldn't find the information, or if they did find it, they couldn't understand it. So one of the recommendations that came out of that was that we needed to promote the website in a bigger way, and that the sections within the council need to update the website with relevant information and in a timely manner, and they could contact the CSU then for trends. Now we keep close contact with our other directorates, and we keep them abreast of what trends are happening, and the website then accordingly is updated to meet those needs. So if we move on to the next slide, we asked the callers how best they would like to engage with the council, and 41% of the respondents said their preference was for face-to-face engagement, followed by 25% via email. So one of the interesting things that came out of this was that it just wasn't elderly people who would have preferred the face-to-face engagement. It was across all age groups. So if we move on to the next slide, we then asked the clients how best they would like to engage with the council. So 30% of them opted for the website, 28% opted for the social media channels, and 23% of them opted for local radio. Now, one of the assumptions that we had formed was that people would want a digital newsletter, because this was very well received in the business community. So I suppose it comes down to knowing who we're delivering the services to and what they require from us. So moving on now to the journey mapping and service assessment, I'll hand back to Dympna.
Thanks, Phelim. Yeah, so I suppose we had gathered all this information and we actually came up with the questions that you saw there that we asked in the survey ourselves, really, and that was through experience. It's what we wanted to find out here. And we also have pages and pages, which we haven't shown you, of comments collected from the public when they rang in, and also comments by the agents that answered the phone. So we've a whole pile of other background information there was just too much to show you. But so backing that up, but these were the main questions we wanted to ask. But anyway, the journey mapping and service assessment, there was no point, I suppose, in having this information and not doing anything with it. So we went back to the senior management team with the results of the survey, and we got the directors there to talk to their staff down the lines to see that we could work with them. And one of the things that we did was a journey mapping process. So what we did is that we followed a case right through. In other words, the phone rang, a member of the public gave whatever they were looking for, and then we followed that case step by step by step until it was closed. You know, who logged it on our customer relations management scheme system, who responded to it, who was it passed on to, who eventually closed it, was it done, was the job done? And then at the same time, we did a service assessment which looked at the back office practices to see where the pain points were and to see if those practices could be improved. And, you know, we did find a lot of things here. You know, there was duplication, there was people closing off cases just because they had passed it on to somebody else. So there was a lot of things that we had to look at there. So if we just maybe look at the next slide, and this is just an example of what journey mapping looks like. So it actually was done by somebody in our corporate affairs section, Karen Fitzgerald, and this was traffic. So this is all just for one section of traffic. So each case, you know, the phone call or the email came in, it then passed the customer service unit into the system, who was it assigned to? So we followed it the whole way along, and we talked to each person at that step and what they did with it. And again here, you know, we did find some problems and issues here. There was duplication. Somebody might have inputted the information into the CRM system, but they also may have rang the engineer. You know, there were a couple of things that there was a wasting of time, and certainly that it could have been made much more efficient. So if we go to the next slide there. Okay, so after that, we looked at opportunities, insights and barriers, and we looked at things like staff and training. We looked at our customer relations management system. We looked at our website. We worked a lot with our communications team. We looked at customer expectations, online forms. Mobile devices is a big one here, getting mobile devices and the CRM system loaded up for our outdoor staff. We looked at things here like what was the effort and what was the value in any change we made. Obviously, if it's high value, low effort, go with it. We'll do that as fast as we can. If it's the opposite, you know, that can be put on the long finger for a while. The most important things that came out of here, I think, were the groups that were set up afterwards. We now have a working group that meets about once a quarter, and it has a staff member from every section. So that's very useful. We can work back and forth on those. The email and phone policy was strengthened. Things like hunting seemed very simple, but especially during COVID with remote working, it became a huge issue. Answering machines getting filled up, no out of office, hunting, all of that kind of thing can make a huge difference to the public when they're trying to ring us. I talked about duplication and closing off of cases. So all those things became very important, and we made all those recommendations. And again, we tried to make all the back office staff come along with us and sort of buy into it, and make it more, I suppose, more beneficial to all of us. So the last slide there, sorry, maybe it's the second last slide, we're nearly there anyway. The ICT, the most important group I think that was set up was, there's a group set up between ourselves and the customer service unit, ICT department and communications. I think that one has really changed, is a game changer for us. They looked at streamlining and customized system notifications, the mobile CRM system, as I talked about, training. There's now a counsellor. There's a counsellor portal set up, and we're looking at a customer portal. The search function and the website design were two of the most important things. We found things like, we found things like people didn't know what a civic amenity was. They searched for the word dump. They didn't know what social housing was. They looked for the words council house. And if that wasn't there for them, then they just rang the customer service unit looking for the information. So the language is a huge issue that we didn't realise was so important, really. So now we've changed a lot of the language. And another very important thing that we did is that on a regular basis now, the agents in the customer service unit gather all the frequently asked questions, and we test them ourselves. So we go in and say, if I'm a member of the public and I'm looking for this question, which comes up every day of the week, is it easy to find? Do we need to put it out on social media, on the council website, to say, if you're looking for something, it's on the website, it's here, and those reminders. And we go to the section, we use ICT, and we use comms again on that. So that has proved very, very useful. For all of us. Very simple, I suppose, but we need to test as if we're a member of the public, which we weren't doing. So I think, yeah, the next slide will just say thank you for, oh no, outcomes and challenges. Yeah. So what were the outcomes? This was done early last year. So what were the outcomes? Phone and email policy, we're drumming that home every week. The establishment of working groups, the FAQs, the better use of our customer relations management system, the counsellor portal, that's kind of still trialling, but we're hoping that that'll cut down the number of calls coming through directly to the sections, but we're not sure about that, as I think everybody in local authorities can imagine. We did get extra resources, we got extra staff in the customer service unit, and we have just done another exercise now, and there has been a significant reduction in calls and repeat calls this year, so we're very happy about that. Some of the challenges, I suppose, back offices working with us and back offices setting up their phones and emails properly, tracking the opportunities and progress. The place is so big here, as you can imagine. We really need to depend on champions in each section to keep this going. We're always looking for more resources. Change is always difficult for people to change practices. We've made major changes in our depots. As you can imagine, we have lots of depots around the city, and the people there have now started using the customer relations management system, as opposed to writing out, literally they were writing out notes for each other, you know, so that has changed. And I suppose some of these are very controversial, but sometimes we go caught up in what's going on in the office and what time we're taking our tea break. So we will try to make the whole organisation customer focused, if we can, and trying to just push that home. So the last slide, I think, eventually says thank you very much. So
thank you very much, Dympna and Phelim. Really interesting insights. I loved your reference to notions at the start, and my late mother used to disparage people having notions, but I do think that actually,
yeah, Cork people definitely have notions about themselves.
Yes, I think as public servants, we probably need to develop a bit more notions in some ways, in the sense that this network is all about not being shy about blowing our trumpet about doing really good stuff. I was also curious as to whether yourself and Jennifer had put your heads together beforehand, because that housing maintenance issue chimed exactly with her stats.
It's incredible, yeah. And I worked in the county for a while, and I did deal with the Ombudsman and the FOIs. It's all about housing. It's all about housing, and it's all about how you're treated. So actually, when you were speaking, we were nodding our head here. It is all about housing, really, you know. So it's
such a sensitive area. I had a question for you around the one thing that struck me is it's all very positive and it's great, but you talk about sort of buy-in from around the organisation and a lot of change in that. ultimately, though, I mean, when you start to pull together where the repeat business is coming from, when you start to pull together what the issues are, you're bringing a certain amount of bad news to people as well, that you're throwing a spotlight on the areas that the customers have a difficulty with. Getting that buy-in sounds almost too easy in a way. Like, I mean, did you have very senior management cover from the start to say that the whole organization was to row in behind this, or did you have people? Did people react badly to some of that bad news, or how did you manage it?
Yeah, it was very difficult to manage. You're right, because it did throw light on some very bad practices, you know, and we had to put our hands up and say that. What the buy-in, that the way that we try to get most buy-in is by, and I think it was mentioned earlier here, if you can give the customer an answer. I'm really sorry, you know, your housing maintenance issue is not going to be fixed for 3 weeks, but it will be fixed within the 3 weeks. So if the different sections gave us the information, we could give it to the public, and then they knew. So they wouldn't ring again. They certainly wouldn't ring within the 3 weeks. If we failed and it went to 4 weeks, yeah, we'll get the call. So, you know, and yeah, it was very difficult, and a lot of people didn't like what was thrown up here. And there were arguments about it. There were arguments at S&T, but I suppose the very senior management team recognised that it was an issue, and they did row in behind us. And we had to, I suppose, try and make it seem that in the long run that it would be easier for everybody. But it's a long, ongoing process. It's not going to change overnight, if ever. I don't know. Some areas will change, some won't, you know.
No, I don't think perfection is ever going to be achieved, but it's
not.
It's really great to be able to pick up the issues and reflect them back, and yeah, I would have expected, all right, that element of challenge within that. So listen, thanks for that. You know, and I think that piece as well that you just touched on there is something that we all would chime with us all, is that question of customer certainty. So even if you tell somebody, look, I know you're disappointed, it's going to take 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is, but the fact that you do tell them it will take that time, as opposed to the black hole where the query has gone in and no response is forthcoming. That's where the frustration, I think, grows in the community. Listen, that's great. Thank you very much. Sorry, Phelim, do you want to come in there?
For the first 4 months of 2022, our repeat housing maintenance calls have reduced by an average of 504 per month. So that is something positive, and it shows that, you know, there is buy-in in terms of, as Dympna pointed out there, communication back to the client as to when their issue will be dealt with. You know, some people are very demanding. They ring at 10 o'clock and they're back on at 10 to say the plumber hasn't arrived yet. But it's managing the expectations and giving clarity to the client in terms of how long the issue is going to take to be resolved. And as I say, we've had a reduction of 504 calls per month on average. So we're heading in the right direction, we think.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks very much, and that must be massively de-stressing as well for your customer service agents when you get those repeat calls down. Thanks for that. I'm just going to turn to the Q&A box here and see what we've picked up in it over the morning. First question was just if the presentations and recordings will be shared, and the answer to that is yes, and they'll be available through the QCSN portal. Dave Nutley also asked, was there a recent, this is referring to the Business Customer Service Survey, equivalent survey of members of the public. Yes, there's a civil service customer survey undertaken regularly, but the next one is due in 2023. And again, that'll be really interesting. And I think, just again, going back to the conversation earlier, those reflections from the business community may be quite different to the reflections from the individuals, particularly around channel management and how we deliver our services. Benary Rickard has asked, have you, and you being any one of the wise members of the panel, specific advice for a service that are internally focused, where the customer is the staff in your organization? And I think that's a really interesting question. And I'm just thinking of who might be best to pick it up, and possibly yourself, Dympna, actually. That idea of surveying behaviour and attitudes with the internal team. It's a very
good idea, actually. It is a very good idea. And it is something, actually, now that it's brought up, that would be very helpful to us as well. Following on the external survey, what do you think of the recommendations? You probably would need to be anonymous. That's one of the things that I would say, and I would think that you would need to pick who you're going to survey very carefully. It almost needs to be people on the front line.
Thanks, Dympna. And Jean, if I might ask you on the same topic, because I know you've done some work in this area too.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that point. You need to decide, on your business needs, should it be confidential or should it be anonymous? If it's a really small group within your organization, I think an anonymous survey. I just wanted to say something as well that we found in our surveys is the use of these free text boxes. That really allows people to engage with you, and you're going to find out things that you didn't even know you were looking for. So in terms of kind of soliciting information from your internal customers, yeah, a range of tick box type questions to get to, some focused answers, but allowing some comment boxes to let the person speak to you, I think is a good way to increase engagement.
And obviously it adds to the work of the survey team, but valuable nonetheless.
It does, but I find, I've found it very valuable, and then you can kind of, pass on even quite specific information on to other parts of the organization as a result.
I might just stick with yourself, Jean, because we have another question there that I mentioned earlier on survey fatigue, especially in relation to the internal customer base. It's inevitable. Yeah. What can we do about it?
Sure. I mean, I don't personally understand why someone could be fatigued by surveys, but no, Revenue has, we have a program actually of kind of behavioral insights that we have tested on our surveys, and some of the things which have we've learned as a result of these behavioral insight tests is around increasing response rates. So some of the things I'd advise is personalization. So to say, "Dear Brian" rather than "Dear Sir," when you're communicating with your survey respondents, ensuring as much simplification as possible in the communication and the survey, but in particular in the communication to people. We've found that sending things on Monday mornings is better than sending them on a Wednesday afternoon in terms of ensuring higher response rates. And I'd say make it easy for people. So, if you hold information already on your customers, don't ask that again in the survey. So in Revenue, we used to, we survey SMEs as another example of a customer group we survey. We used to ask in the surveys, what industry are you in? How long have you been an SME, etc. We don't do that anymore because my team, we can find that information from other data sources within Revenue. So we don't impose that burden. So keeping it short, if you can. There's something I want to raise as well, just the survey fatigue thing kind of prompted it, and it's something we're finding with our current customer survey, which is the first we've done since the pandemic, but it's the first we've done since the HSE cyber attack last year, and the issue of people being reluctant to do surveys because they have kind of security concerns. So that is something I think maybe to flag to this network as well. How can organizations have very clear communication policies, electronic communication policies with their customers for those that are, legitimately worried about their cybersecurity. I don't have the answer, but I just thought I'd raise it as well.
Yeah, I think it's hugely pertinent, because we're all facing it, and I've seen so many organisations recently having to give out notices to customers to advise them that certain types of queries don't come from them, but also, as you say, those reassurances around cybersecurity. I don't know, does anybody else on the panel want to comment on that? No, but I think there's no doubt that the reassurances, and particularly in surveys, the reassurances that we gave around both confidentiality and security of their traffic and everything else are just enormously important. And equally, the confidentiality piece, I think, applies equally to the internal and the external. There's a few other pieces coming up, but I'm kind of conscious of time. Unfortunately, we're getting caught. There's one or two important announcements that we need to make before we finish. But I do want to, first of all, just thank all of our speakers and contributors this morning for, I think, again, we're running out of time because it's been so interesting and such a lively engagement. I think this is a massively important topic, and I think there's a lot of powerful stuff to take away from this morning. I mean, we started with that really good news from Clare, but with certain notes of warning in it that we'll have to pick up on. I think Jennifer's really positive approach to how we deal with complaints and use them as learning experiences, again, is just such a valuable piece to come from that. Jean's really practical example of how a large organization can go out and ask its customers questions and then take them and do very different things just to apply the learning in a really focused way. And then from Dympna and Phelim, I think that rich insight into really just getting to grips with what is annoying, upsetting your customers, but also having that internal support to actually make change happen. And I think that's really important, because if you ask the questions and don't respond to the answers, there's trust and credibility damage, and trust and credibility is so vital to what we do. Just before we conclude, and just first, again, thank you. I mean, for all of you, those were really, and I know it's just that you talked about Monday mornings a minute ago there, Jean. I mean, this is a virtual Monday morning, and that it's the Tuesday after a bank holiday. So to everybody who prepared beforehand and came in this morning to deliver, thank you so much for that. One of the things that I do want to mention that's important from the network as a whole is there some changes in our core support from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. It's quite a sad day for us, because our good friend and colleague Grace O'Shaughnessy is moving on to other things. Grace is going to solve the health crisis by moving into the Department of Health and to become involved in the management of Sláintecare. But Grace has made a massive contribution to making this network what it is. And to put that in context, I think when she became involved in this 4 years ago, the network itself had 83 members. It now has over 900. And it has grown to having over 130 organizations involved in it. And that commitment, that energy and the drive that Grace has put into it has been just hugely instrumental in making that happen. So I really do want to thank Grace so much for that. And she's driven an awful lot of the initiatives that have come out of this, things like the communications toolkit, the plain English guide, the excellence in customer service case studies, all of those things. So you're going to be very sadly missed, Grace. And if we weren't digital, we'd have an deafening round of applause from the audience, but I think you can just assume that it's happening in the privacy of everybody's offices and homes at this stage. I think I'd also then just like to say we're not being left bereft. We are losing Grace, but Colin Flaherty is joining us in Deeper, and Colin is no stranger to this area of work. He's been very much involved in the innovation network from Deeper for some time, and so, but he is still going to have a massive challenge to fill those, and not casting any aspersions on your feet, Grace, but very big shoes to be filled here.
Thank you, Brian. Brian, it's been a privilege working with the group, and it's been brilliant, particularly having the opportunity just to work with so many people from across the public service. But I just want to acknowledge Nora O'Donnell, who has been an absolutely key part of this team since she joined. And before Nora, Caroline Winston, and before Caroline, there was other Deeper colleagues, but it's been an absolute privilege and great to work with you too. Thank you. And Colin is an expert in the innovation network and other work of Deeper and OPS, so it's networks in good hands. And with Nora still there at the helm, that's in good hands.
Thanks, Grace. And yes, Nora is managing that continuity extremely effectively. And Colin, you're very, very welcome to the club.
That's great. Thanks, thanks, Breen. And look, just to say, really enjoyed the session this morning. I've been joining them for the last while as a member and listening on with great interest. But it's nice to be here as a panel member and listening to Jean, Jennifer, Clare, Dympna, and Phelim this morning was really really enjoyable. I'd agree with one thing, Breen. I think taking up the mantle from Grace is a very unenviable task. In fairness, she's grown the QCSN both in terms of quality and quantity, and the work outside of the network itself has been excellent. So I'm just looking forward to working with yourself and working with Nora and Owen, and I suppose doing what we can in terms of enhancing customer service across the public service.
Thanks, Colin. Yes, I think it's a just such a valuable, and I have to say I've only been involved now for about 1.5 years, and I have to say it's one of the more exciting roles that I've had in the public service and after many years, because just the really positive energy in the network and the excellent examples and that willingness of people to share their pride in the things that we do, and to give us all that opportunity to learn from each other. And as we kind of move forward in the sort of massive changes in service delivery through the stuff you'd be probably more familiar with from your other networks, the innovation and digitalization, and that keeping the customer front and center in all of that is just going to be so vital.
Yeah, I think for us, like, the journey starts and ends with the customer. So I mean, it's only natural that being involved with this might keep the whole innovation agenda a bit more customer focused.
Well, I think we'll rely on you to bridge that as well. Make sure that innovation and customer remain centre. So really, just to wrap up this morning, and it's one of the things that kind of struck me as we talked is, like, why we listen to our customers is to enhance our service, but it's also one of those critical pieces of developing trust, and that trust element is so absolutely vital. We've talked before in this network about how, and Grace had found us some research about that relationship between quality of service and trust in the public service, and from that into the actual trust in public services, systems and government itself, and the quality of democracy. So not to put too big a burden on the members of the network, ultimately the quality and future of our democracy is to some extent in your hands, because all of our frontline people who deliver customer services are the visible piece of the state to our citizens. And if that visible piece is positive, the state is viewed positively, then people have faith in the state and they have faith in democracy. And there's a lot of research to back that up. So I say, you might say I'm getting notions now, but it is a critical piece. And it's just interesting to note that the CSO had recently worked with the OECD on developing a wider trust survey. And we're looking forward to fairly soon having comparative data across 21 participating countries being published. Again, it's just sneak previews. Ireland looks quite good in it, and that's really important. But again, we'll talk at a future network meeting about some more of the detail in that. Again, just to conclude then, I mean, I think this morning has been really affirming and really positive, and that's great. But let's also heed the few warnings that are in there too. I think it's been one thing that came out very clear from Clare's presentation earlier is just that question mark over the visibility, if not necessarily the accessibility of our complaints mechanisms. We've heard from Jennifer as to how we can make those better, and I think let's seize that opportunity, and hopefully the next time that survey is done, that 30% who believe the complaints mechanisms are accessible and good will have gone down significantly. Just to remind you then, in conclusion, that today's webinar will be posted on, that answer to the question that came up earlier, www.ops.gov.ie, where you'll find all the good information about the goings on of the network as well. And also to let you know that the next QCN event will take place on Tuesday, the 27th of September. Put it in your diary now, you won't want to miss it. Thank you all very much, and in the interim, do enjoy your summer. Take care.
Thanks, Breen.